All right. Well,
Good
I will
evening.
just start with the short introduction then, Andrew, and then we'll roll.
Okay.
Tonight's presentation is, gosh, I think this is the fourth presentation in our Getting to Zero series, sponsored by C-Free. C-Free stands for Carbon-Free Residential, Everything Electric, and we are a working group of the Lincoln Green Energy Committee. I'm Colette Sizer. I'm just one of the organizers in the group. We've got a really dynamic group of people, so if any of you would be interested in coming to listen in, you're always welcome. We have had a series of presentations, and these have all been taped and they're on our website. We started with the envelope. We did a second session on the envelope that discussed upgrading your windows. We did a presentation on solar, and tonight we're doing the retrofit of the historical home. The next presentation after this will be on heat pumps, April 27th. And then we're planning one on heat pump water heaters, and the date on that is to be determined. Not part of this series, but we want to make sure everybody knows about it, is the electric vehicle show that we're going to be doing on July 4th. So with that, Andrew, let's get started.
Thank you, Colette, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to Case Studies in Retrofitting Your Historical Home to Get to Net Zero. I'm the president of the Friends of Modern Architecture in Lincoln and also a member of the C-Free group. And of course, as many of you know, FoMA is an organization that is committed to the preservation, education, and documentation of modern houses in Lincoln. But we also have a great interest in sustainability, which is a very important aspect of preserving the built environment in our community. And I want to thank Colette and C-Free for sponsoring their remarkable series of presentations on helping us get our houses to net zero. And I really urge everybody to watch the recordings if you haven't been able to see them. They're very informative and help us all start on the path to making our houses more sustainable. So as we noted in our invitation for tonight's program, we all learn from each other. And so we have a robust discussion planned tonight so that we can all learn from each other's experiences in retrofitting homes with the goal of making them more sustainable. And what we'd like to discuss tonight and discuss with each other is the interesting intersection between technology and design. We love our houses because of the way they look and the qualities of the house. Inside, looking outside to nature, outside, arriving home, or enjoying being in our garden or on our deck. And getting our older homes to net zero will take the addition of new systems in the houses, new insulation, new windows and doors. And the question is, how can we make these changes and at the same time respect the architecture of the house and the design qualities that make our home feel so special? We have 6 case studies from a variety of perspectives of individuals in our community who have embarked on this endeavor. And these are meant to be short narratives to give you a high-level overview of what our presenters have experienced in making their homes more sustainable, and are meant to inspire questions from the audience to enable us to have a discussion about how to embark on these types of projects. And I'd like to just very quickly introduce our panelists. Dana Robot, one of the founders of FoMA and our past president and our current board member, will share her thoughts on sustainability and preservation. FoMA board member, architect and landscape architect, Matt Anderson Miller, who has restored several homes in Concord and Lincoln, will present next. Sebastian Barveld is a FoMA board member who is in the process of retrofitting his modern home to make it more sustainable. Then Colette and Chuck Sizer, who are the leaders of our C-Free group, will talk about their extensive retrofit of their modern home. Then Woody Arthur, a FoMA board member and architect and homeowner in Lincoln, will talk about the work he's done on his modern house. And then Stephen Durain, who is a member of C-Free and a builder, will also talk about his work. And we're also very pleased to have Mark Gutterman, a FoMA board member, with us this evening, and a builder and a homeowner in Lincoln, who will join us for our discussion after the presentations. You heard a lot of mention of individuals who are restoring and retrofitting modern houses, but really a lot of the lessons that they have experienced in doing the work on their houses apply to really the whole housing stock that already exists. And I think you'll find, even though we're talking about, and you'll see a lot of images of modern homes, that these same lessons and discussion points apply to any older home, and the thoughts of how to introduce new technology to make houses sustainable, and also to preserve and respect the important architectural elements that really make our individual houses special. So let's start learning from each other. And when the panelists are finished, we really invite you to type your questions into the chat feature or raise your virtual hand on the reactions button at the bottom of your screen, and I'll facilitate a discussion. With that, I will turn it over to Dana, who will kick us off. And Dana and our other presenters, if you will just say next. Matt has kindly agreed to advance the slides for us. So
Okay,
Dana.
all right.
So should I share my screen then with the slides?
Yes, please.
Okay.
All right, well, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the dawning challenges of updating modern architecture. FoMA board members Woody Arthur, Matt Anderson Miller, and Mark Getteman will be presenting the technical insight tonight, but I wanted to remind the audience about the significance of saving these homes. Culturally, after the land, architecture is our town's most important cultural feature. Our culture is communicated in its colonial era houses, its straightforward farmhouses, barns, and sheds, the town's churches, its late 19th century civic buildings, Bemis Hall and the Lincoln Library, through the simple, modest forms of modern architecture seen in the unique Lincoln Mall, Lincoln Woods, our schools, the arrival of the Contemporary Art Center, the DeCordova Museum, our modern neighborhoods, and the town's notable collection of modern houses. Their presence expresses who we have been, and how we care for these important buildings expresses who we are today. Modern houses were purposely designed without extraneous ornament, with generous amounts of glass to give openness and abundant light. Their form emerged in the early 20th century in Europe as a symbol to express a generation's desire for honesty and transparency in a world polluted and disrupted by the Industrial Revolution, upended by the First World War, and later the opaque forces of fascism. The modern form was a symbol of a hopeful future, and as leaders looked to architecture to contribute to a healthier, harmonious world. The social history of these houses is just as important to our culture. In great part, they have contributed to the town's sense of place, allowing Lincoln's unique post-war development to be subsumed by the land. Lincoln's unique post-war development, modern houses were modest in scale, efficiently built, and sited to conform to Lincoln's intimate landscape. Environmentally, maintaining symbolic elements that allow a maximum of light and a minimum of interference to enjoy nature is a conundrum. Next, Matt, please. Rather than pulling out the original windows, Judith and Packy Lawler pulled out their favorite sweaters to withstand the cold winds that seep through the large single pane plate glass windows installed in another era in their 1949 house designed by Judith's father, Lawrence B. Anderson, MIT professor and architect of Lincoln's innovative 1948 Smith School. Next, Matt, please. It's a picture of Judith and Packy in their house, in their modern house, their plywood interior. Woody, Matt, and Mark have often pointed out, and will point out tonight, though seemingly simple, a modern house is one of the most complicated to design and build. Without trim or decorative elements to hide the way different materials are joined or approaching corners, a deft hand and eye are demanded at every turn, since modern design rejects the extraneous. Each decision challenges restraint. The narrow profiles of trim surrounding windows, the careful proportions and scale in their overall composition, and the scintillating play of light through plate glass windows inviting nature in are hallmarks in the creative, experimental modern houses we find in Lincoln. Though eminently simple, and many tired and seemingly past their useful lives, FoMA has been devoted to shining light on our important collection of modern architecture as icons of Lincoln's rich cultural heritage, worthy of care and thoughtful preservation. In the article, Why Old is the New Green, written by Jean Caroon, an environmental preservationist, she notes that extending the service life of any object avoids the environmental impact of replacing it. Regular maintenance is required. We cannot consume our way to sustainability. Her work has led her to see the importance of humility, respect, and measure as one approaches this work, with an emphasis on humility. Lincoln's culture is unique. Our land and unpretentious simple architecture is appreciated by those who seek out the town as an equalizing place of peace. And as stewards, we welcome the opportunity to work together to preserve and update our buildings in a responsible manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. And Matt, we'll invite you to present next.
Thank you. Hi, as Andrew says, I am an architect and landscape designer, and I have been working with sustainability and historic preservation for virtually all of my career, starting in the early 90s in Boston, working on a project called the Sustainable Boston Initiative for the city of Boston. And back then was doing a lot of historic preservation, which in those days meant 18th and 19th century houses, not 20th century houses. So as the years have gone on, we've progressed to agree, and FoMA has been so on the forefront of recognizing the importance of preserving houses of the 20th century that are contributing to the built environment, the history, and the heritage of our area. So I want to talk about these houses through that lens. And I have two houses to discuss that I think represent two ends of a continuum in terms of historic value and relevance in relation to sustainability. So in both of these houses, one in Lincoln and one in Concord, there was a twin desire to preserve them and restore them as much as possible while creating much more energy efficiency and hopefully getting to net zero energy use. And one of the challenges here is that some of the very qualities of the homes and the elements of the homes that define their architecture and their history are not the most energy efficient. And so we have to weigh those and decide on what we're going to trade off. And one of the things that I think it's important to not forget is what's called embodied energy, which I think most, if not all of you probably know, is the sum of all the carbon emissions from the energy that was used to create the materials, to transport them, to assemble them, and they are here now in the house. And so we need to weigh when we're upgrading or renovating the home and thinking about sustainability, we really want to consider the trade-off between embodied energy of the new materials and the ones that we are removing or demolishing. And it really speaks to the plight of both of these houses. So the one on the right, built in 1962, is a deck house in Concord that was owned by one family for 50 years and but unoccupied for the last 3 years that they owned it. And so the building was decrepit. There had been a flood. It was really seen as a teardown by the realtors and people looking at it. And turns out that actually it was fairly sound, and we were able to go in and renovate it and upgrade it. And all of that embodied energy that was in the original structure was maintained and kept on the site. And we were able to add efficiency upgrades. The house on the left, which is the Schwann House in Lincoln, from an earlier period, 1948, also I think could be seen as vulnerable given its age, its configuration, being of another time and not really up to the way people are living today. But it's a house that was occupied by the original couple that built it for almost 80 years. And we were fortunate to be able to go in and do a restoration on it. And so both houses have important elements that we chose not to do the most energy efficient thing as possible, but otherwise what we did was both houses were using oil-fired radiators and boilers for their heating, and both have been replaced. In the Schwann House, they were replaced by electric heat pumps. It's a fairly recent project, and they were recently available. In the deck house, a propane natural gas system replaced the oil, and so hopefully in the future that can in turn be replaced by an electric system. Both houses were in pretty rough shape at the beginning. The Schwann House was quite livable, though, it just needed a little bit of freshening up. The deck house, as you can see, was kind of sad, and it's hard when you look at some of these architecturally significant houses in their least favorable condition to see the value in them, to see the potential. And so that's what we're hoping to bring out in them. And so windows, I think in all houses, are very important from an energy standpoint. And in modern homes, and really any historic house, it's often one of the significant elements that you want to preserve. And they're both significant architecturally to creating the atmosphere and the environment, and they're also significant technologically and from a historic standpoint. So in the Schwann House, we had existing large panes of single pane glass, clear glass, and opted to not replace it, in part due to cost, but also because that clear glass, those large expanses of glass, contribute to the architecture by bringing the outdoors in, by really erasing the distinction between indoors and out. And that is something that you can't achieve today with double or triple pane large windows with low E coatings. So in the case of a house like this, it seems relevant to retain those aspects and to look elsewhere for energy efficiency and sustainability. In the deck house, which is more of a production house, there's many examples of it. Windows are important, but not quite to the level that they are in the other house. So here, all of the glass was replaced with insulated low E glass. And so we achieved that level of energy efficiency. We added several inches of foam insulation to the roof. All of the walls were opened up and insulated. So we created a much tighter envelope here and a fairly efficient house for one of that age. And on the deck house, we have a 12 kilowatt photovoltaic array that in 3 years has produced over 80% of the energy needs for the house, including for an electric car. Both houses have induction cooktops and stoves, which I think once you experience that, you'll never go back to gas. So bit by bit, we're taking away the fossil fuels from these houses. On the left, the Schwan house has heat pumps, which you can see in the bottom front of the photo, except you can't see them because they're hidden behind a screen. And this is an example of how you can integrate new technology into a house and make it fit into the landscape and blend in and be subtle so that it's not overpowering or distracting from the architecture. Another aspect to me of sustainability that's important to remember is the landscape. And so both of these houses have interesting stories about landscaping. This here is the compost area for the house in Concord. All of the landscaping that was introduced to the Concord house is native to New England and Massachusetts. So virtually all of the plant material is native, and it shows what you can do with plants and flowers and trees from the region and create biodiversity, support pollinators, reduce water usage and use of fertilizer, and still have a beautiful landscape. In the Schwan house, there's also a historic aspect to the garden, which was that it had been laid out and the plants had been selected by Will Curtis, who was one of the folks who started Garden in the Woods in Framingham and was an early proponent of native landscaping. So it was important to keep all of those native shrubs and trees that were extraordinary specimens now, and to make sure that what was added was complementary to that. And in both houses, it's worth pointing out the grass areas, the lawn areas are all native sedges and what's called a no-mow lawn. So they require less water, no fertilizer, and mowing is optional. You can mow them if you want a few times a year, or you can kind of just let them get a little floppy. But that is a way of having an outdoor green space that isn't as environmentally destructive as a traditional lawn. So with that, I will end and pass the baton on to Sebastian.
Thank you, Matt, very much. And Sebastian, you're up.
Hi there. My name is Sebastian Bareveld. I'll be quicker, I think. We live in a fairly large modern house in a historic district that was built in two phases in 1959 and 1978. When we moved here in 2018 in the summer, we were a bit shocked about the oil bill, living in a glass box in the woods. So we immediately decided to make some changes. There's a glass box in the woods. I'll be very brief again. We have worked on energy retrofits in 5 sort of directions. First, we updated the mini splits with heat pumps, and we actually took out mini splits, consolidated them, and made and reinstalled more efficient units. Then we also took the roof off, which was due for a new for replacement, and at the same time added, depending on the section, 1 inch or 2 inches of foam underneath, helping the envelope there. The third phase was installing solar panels, which on average cover about half of our power needs. On Monday was the first time that I've seen it cover 100% of our power needs. It was also very important to us and the company we finally chose that the panels are not visible from grade, so it does not affect the aesthetics of the house. Fourth is we installed a highly efficient catalytic wood stove with a blower, which heats the largest common area of the house, basically from trees that fall on the property, which is 5 to 6 cords a year. That thing is cranking from October, and it's still on now. The fifth the thing we've been working on is the fenestration. We have 204 windows, according to my kids. Some are as recent as 2000, but many others are large expanses from the 70s, which are double pane, but still from the 70s. Now we have sourced what we think are pretty good looking, low profile, highly insulating windows locally. The big issue that we've had is finding a contractor to commit to the rough opening size for these windows. And without that, we don't feel comfortable putting in a large investment of buying these. So we're still working on that last project of finding someone to actually install the windows. And that's it.
Excellent. Thank you, Sebastian. And we had a question from the audience about which company you used for installing your solar panels.
We use New England Clean Energy, which is, I think, out of Harvard, Mass.
Great.
Yeah, they were very accommodating to our wishes in terms of not putting hundreds of screws through our new rubber membrane roof, and also making it basically invisible.
Terrific. All right. Thank you very much. And Colette and Chuck.
There we go. Okay, go ahead and you can start. So this is the house that Colette and I moved into about 11 years ago. It was designed by Shercliffe and LeBlanc, and it was built for Vince Merrill. All three of them are fairly well-known architects, and it's kind of a classic mid-century modern with a lot of windows. And if you'll notice, just below the windows, instead of having panels there, we have vents that allow fresh air to come in. So it's kind of classic for that period, but environmentally, it's not real good. So we took this project on, and here's what we did. Next slide. Yeah, the first thing that we did is we wanted to assess the heat loss of the envelope. So the library has a FLIR camera, and you can check it out, and you can go by panel, door by door, window by window, et cetera, and assess where you're losing heat. So this is an example of, we're shooting a picture from the outside of our kitchen, and you see the bright red spot. Well, that's where the drain goes into the wall, and it's heating up the outdoors. And then you can also see the two windows, we're getting quite a bit of leakage around the windows. So we identified a lot of the weak spots, and we prioritized them, and then we tried to fix them. We also took and assembled the data on energy usage for the past several years in terms of the therms of gas we had used, the kilowatt hours of electricity, and are these energy sources green or not? Okay, next slide. So the first thing we did to fix the envelope is we started out and we put down 6 inches of polyiso, and we covered that with Den's deck. And the reason for putting on the Den's deck was that we were going to use the same resurfaced roof in order to install our solar. And Den's deck was recommended to us as being the best substance to put down to put on top or put below the solar panels. Second thing we did is we replaced a single pane glass with EAS glass that had a U value of 0.12. These are triple pane with inert gas. So these are about 3 times more efficient, and they're low emissivity glass windows. Then the last thing we did is we fixed the envelope leakage. Since we were getting rid of our gas furnace and our gas water heater, we closed off the chimneys, we've closed off vents, we caulked, and we insulated. And the last thing we did is we removed the gas furnace and installed a heat pump. And this was kind of a tricky business because we didn't know how many therms or how many BTUs we were going to need after we had gone through all of the insulation. So we estimated what we thought it would take and then boosted it 50%. Next thing we did is we installed the heat pump, removed everything, and moved to the next step. Go ahead, next slide. So in doing this project, we didn't want to affect the appearance of the house. We didn't want to have the solar panels visible. We didn't want to have it affect the appearance of the house, etc. So on the right side, you see the house as it looked a year ago, and we have a very narrow roof, and we have old iron opening windows. And then on the left side, you see it afterwards. And there we added the 6 inches of polyiso and trimmed it exactly the same way it was trimmed previously with copper. And you can't really tell the difference in the appearance of the house. So that part we were successful on. Next slide. So the last thing we did is we converted to solar, and we estimated our needs. We thought we were going to need about 24,000 BTUs, but we decided to go with 36,000 BTUs. And we had the solar array installed, turned on, and we also installed a charging station for an electric vehicle. And last March 21st, which was just about a week ago, we generated 9 kilowatt hours more than what we used. So we are now actually delivering back to the grid. And that's essentially what we did.
All right. Thank you, Chuck. And a question from the audience about who manufactured the windows that you installed.
The windows were provided by EAS. And before you install those windows, you need to come and take a look at ours and learn from some of the things that we did incorrectly. It's not hard to do it correctly, but it requires some experience in installing them.
And one important point to note is that to keep with the architecture of the home, we didn't put in these, we have a large number of fixed windows, and to keep the opening the same size, we replaced the glass. So we installed the pane, not the entire window. That's a little tricky because you have to make sure they're installed properly to so that they're energy efficient.
Yeah. And then this is a picture of the solar array. We have a 11.2 kilowatt solar array, and it's generating more than enough electricity for us annually. And then we also installed heat pumps, and we have mathematical models on how efficient the heat pumps are, and everything has worked all the way down to 12 below zero. So we're very pleased with the heat pumps. I didn't expect it to be that efficient, but it's doing very well.
Chuck, you want to explain what EAS stands for?
European Architectural Supply, and they are located out of Acton. Very interesting people to talk to about windows.
And I believe too that that's the entity that Sebastian had been talking to as well about making windows for his house. So it's a worthwhile outfit to talk to.
That's correct. And it's owned by a Lincoln resident as well.
When the windows,
was there any worry about providing the code required exit width of the windows, or were they already complying?
we didn't have any concerns about that. I think they're already compliant.
I ask because we have windows that are, I think, 19 inches wide, and the code requires 20.
Oh,
Well, that's an excellent question, Judith, and we'll maybe work through the presentations. We can come back to that point because I think it's a very interesting intersection of when you're upgrading a house and you have a current building code. How do you account for that? And I think,
Well, there may be a dispensation, or there
right.
maybe they can be opening like that instead of like this with a mullion down the middle.
I think you probably can get grandfathered in.
I was wondering about that.
I think the two builders, Stephen and Mark, who are on, will be able to address that question and give us some guidance. So now if we can, we'll turn to Woody Arthur, and Woody, if you'd like to take it away.
Sure, thanks, Andrew. Yes, and I'm, again, Woody Arthur. I'm a FoMA board member for many years and a practicing architect with it in practice. We do a lot of educational buildings as well as homes, and have been very much involved with the evolving frameworks for sustainability that have evolved dramatically over the last couple of decades. In our own house here in Lincoln, if you could go next, and Andrew, live up on Tabor Hill. And for those of you who are familiar with it, you know there's quite a bit of topography. It's quite a hill to get up. We're about halfway up, and we have been here for almost 30 years and have done an addition to the house that was built in 1956. And typical of that era, I think there was an expectation of limitless fossil fuels, and the MIT architects who were living on the road really weren't focused so much on insulation and fossil fuels. Like Matt and others spoke about, we have considerable amount of single pane glazing with beautiful optically clear plate glass. We also have an additional challenge in our house with the roof is essentially flat and drains inboard to interior roof drains, and that configuration is also a vented roof to allow to help manage moisture and condensation. And fixing that condition is challenged in part because we also have this extraordinarily beautiful acoustic plaster ceilings, much like at the Gropius house. It's kind of unique to that era. Really helps dampen the sound and extremely invasive to try to pull it all out when you do the entire roof package. So in lieu of completely redoing the envelope, we looked at the going to electric and heat pumps to try to manage the consumption of fossil fuels, as well as to make things more efficient. Next. And we put on this roof, well, here's the roof from above, an area that you can see. Actually, this is before we did a bit of an addition, but it's quite a bit of flat roof. You can see it actually ponds nicely. And by the way, this era, just as an aside, there were architects planning roofs like this to hold water because the latent heat of evaporation in the summer would cool the house on the inside. So that was Richard Neutra promoted that along with a bunch of other architects, and many roofers we've talked to cannot believe that people design their roofs to hold water. Anyway, we have lots of room to work with for panels. So if you go to the next one, please, Andrew. You can see we did put about 43 panels on the roof. It's about 17.5 kilowatt hour. And I was very concerned about the view to these panels for ourselves, but also for our neighbors. And fortunately, we were able to get them to install them in a fairly low, only I think about 10, 12 degrees. And they are essentially, they're brought back from the parapets. This view is from partway up the hill on the west, but it's not from a neighbor. The neighbor doesn't really have a view over to the top of the house unless they're walking around in the woods. And if you go to the next slide, you can see this is from Tabor Hill itself. You can see there's no visible panels visible from the road. And the next one goes up a little bit higher on the road. If you could flip to the next slide, Andrew. Yeah, so here's just past our driveway. You can just make out there's a little hint of these panels just peeking up over the edge of the roof. Excuse me. So in the end, they're really not that visible. I think probably our neighbors can see them if you peer through the trees, but it's pretty well screened by all the great tree vegetation around the neighborhood. If you go to the next slide, you'll see, zooming in a little bit, you can see some of the that's associated with this. And this is, you know, a bit embarrassing because we, well, first of all, they require that the components you see on the right be facing the street so that the electric company can get to them immediately. So you'll see there the original meter and a new check meter, the switch gear and an inverter. And then of course the conduit going up to pick up the panels on the roof. You know, the installers really weren't very interested in trying to run that conduit through the inside of the house to keep it from coming over the copper drip edge. That would have added considerably to the installation costs, and I don't think they would have actually done it because it would involve cutting open drywall and sheetrock and repairing that and painting and so on. And then the view on the left just happened a month ago. A year and a half into owning this system, the inverter failed, and this is a guy coming out to replace it. It's interesting because it's still fairly new. You know, solar's been around for quite a while, but they're still getting the kinks out. And I don't know, they weren't able to tell us why it failed, but there was a little bit of water in the inverter, and he opened up the drain. So it's interesting. It's still evolving. Next slide. And this is a little graph I put together that basically tracks our electricity usage over the years. Oh, by the way, this house in 1956 was built with ducted heating and cooling gas fire. There's gas in the road, and there was an integral air conditioner and heating system. Which is great for actually replacing with the heat pumps because we could replace the furnace with the electric pump. I don't know if you can get down to the bottom of the slide, but so our electricity usage when we got an electric car, and at the end of 2019, you can see the electric usage starting to go up a little there, and then we put the solar in 21, but our electrical usage continued up because we put the heat pumps in just after that in 22. And so our actual usage is up, 17 kilowatt hours for the year of 22. But our net consumption from the grid is under 4,000. So we're moving in the right direction. We haven't netted on zero yet in this house. There have been months where we produced way more than we've used, and it's great to see that happen. But we've got a ways to go still to get to that. Yeah. And that's
all right. Thank you, Woody, very much. And Stephen, last but not least, we're very interested to hear about your retrofit.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And first, I wanted to thank all the, from the introduction, which was completely inspiring, to all the work that Colette and Chuck have done to put this together, the C3 group together, to Andrew's work, and to Matt's help earlier today, helping me get my act together a little bit. I just want to thank all you people for amazing presentations. So let me try to create some anti-climaxing moments here. So I've been last 26 years or so in the Concord Lincoln area, and 5.5 years ago, we bought a 1952 original Carl Koch house. It was about as original as you could get. There was only a roof and furnace had been replaced, and a 200 amp electrical panel, and everything else was as is, meaning no insulation in the walls, and all original glass and glazings. My focus here is really talking about retrofitting the stationary glass and the double hungs. So if you don't mind, Matt, we'll go to the first picture. This is a standard Conantum style gable end by Carl Koch. It's got a polygon window that is very difficult for a lot of installers. A lot of them will not touch this. And I would recommend changing it out and get rid of all the plexiglass insulators that they would tell you over the 50s and 60s. And just find an installer who can take their time and measure 2 or 3 times before they cut it. It can be done, and it can be done nicely, but so this is your standard setup here. There's a lot of glass, and you really have to watch the way you handle it, because the devil is really in the details with these. So one of our goals was to maintain as much of the original look as possible. The type of construction here made it very easy to take out the single pane glass by removing 4 exterior stops on the outside of the house. Replacing a 1/4 inch single pane glazing with up to 1 inch of duotherm with these types of stops is actually quite easy. The setup is, the seating area is set up very well for 1 inch, up to 1 inch. It's not a problem at all. You just have to cut back the stops to accommodate the extra 3/4 of an inch of new product. So I took that out, have them cut down. Here is a picture of we actually use the same wood because there's great overhangs on the house. The wood was in great shape. It was older pine. It was in good condition. We back cut it, we primed it and put it back in. And it took this seating of the glass very, very well. We looked into the triple pane, which is a fantastic, these come in at about 0.25 on the U factor versus 0.12, which a lot of the triple pane come in at. So it's only half the heat blockage capacity or retaining, but it's, it seems to fit this dial. EAS was fantastic to consult with, but because of their frames and a couple of other dynamics, including the tinting on the glass, we wanted it to match the new double hungs that we put in as well. So we went with this, just made for an easier installation and maintain more of the look of the house. Go to the next one. See, that said, there are still some difficulties when you shift over to a duotherm product. Here shows some of the less than optimal results that I'll be dealing with later this year. We just had these installed last summer. First of all, you see that black line on the picture on the right, that is the desiccant, which is the sealant between the metal spacer and the actual glass itself. That should not be visible. That should be set underneath either the sills or the stops on the exterior side. Often you'll see that the installer will come in with a bead of latex caulking to try to hide that or shield it from not only from the UV gaze, but also the homeowner gaze. They don't want to be showing that that's visible. That can void a warranty, and also it'll add to the rapid breakdown of that material. So a window that could get 30 years of good life could end up breaking down and showing condensate inside the glass after about 12 to 15 years, especially if it's in direct sunlight. So that's one of the issues that so make sure when it gets measured, it is measured well. The stops are usually having 3/4 of an inch on both sides. I can tell you that there shouldn't be more, according to the Brian Shaw, who's a technical consultant at Sicko Glass. Sicko is an insulated glass company up in Maine that produces most of the insulated glass for this area. And when we spoke with him, and he recommends no more than a 1/16 of an inch of a gap between the perimeter of the insulated glass and the frame itself. Often installers will come in and they'll make them a little bit smaller because they don't want the glass to not fit. Then they're stuck with a piece of glass that they have to pay for. So they make it a little bit smaller sometimes. And then you're stuck with these gaps around the perimeter, air pockets that basically are allowing in for air to break into the seam and defeating the entire purpose. So, so a good product to use to fill that area. And this is something that not every installer will do. You have to kind of stay on top of them for this. You want to make sure that that air pocket is filled either with a type of synthetic wool fire stopping material or a latex caulking. in a lot of the material you'll read for these installations for both the double hung and stationary, they'll talk about putting in a sealant. So I spoke to Mr. Shar up in Sicko, and I wanted to be clear about what that sealant material was, because if you use a urethane base sealant, you could end up creating damage to the seal because it'll soften up the seal over time. You really want to install what he referred to as a neutral cured product, and that product will not compete with the edging around the polymer around the frame, and it'll seal up that void. And that void is really going to be bringing in cold air in the wintertime or hot air in the summer. So so those are a few of the areas you have to watch out for when you're dealing with these. Also, there's the footing on the new seating is a little bit wider than the old. You're adding about 3/4 of an inch, so you have to make sure it's sitting on something on a wedge that's going to maintain the window stability properly. So, and this is something we put in Pella double hung. Moving on to the double hungs, we put in the Pella Artisan series, and this is one of the this comes with the window and tells you how to install it. There's not a lot of detail here, shall we say, so you really have to watch out for a few things when you're retrofitting a house, especially when a lot of these more modern double hung windows are designed for a more standard either 2x4 or 2x6 construction with standardized extension jambs around them. We're living in worlds in these 1950s houses that standardization is not a standard commodity. So you have to either go to a smaller window and either jam it out yourself or just make sure that you're seating the window as best you can. So moving on to the next one. That does mention a few of the positives about going with a retrofit versus a new construction, which has a flange, which really starts to interfere with your exterior. The first challenge I found choosing the double hung is one that suits your aesthetic goals or interests. And our goal was to find a solid window that was similar as possible to the original window from the design and from the interior, and then took on a little bit more of an updated look on the exterior in terms of material and color. So it's very important to make sure you know what the widths are for the actual frame of the retrofit, along with the sash. So you see here the amount of exposed area between the frame and the sash on the Pella Artisan came in exactly 2 inches, which was about 1/8 of an inch more than the original window. So we didn't really lose much glazing there. It's important to look at that measurement because I measured some windows that were over 3 inches. So you start looking at that from a broad point of view, it really changes the way that you view the exterior once you're inside the house. It really, you may get used to it after a while, but it can be a shock. So that's a key element, I think, is anticipating the glazing. An easy way to do it is just measure the inside of the amount of glass with the existing glass, just to make a comparison. Also, how the double hung windows relate to your casing, and how well they fit in without looking like they're like a retrofit. You want to make it look as natural as possible, and I think we achieve that with this. You see that on the left-hand side, you see the elements, the casing, the frame around the retrofit really doesn't jump out too much. And then on the right-hand side, you see that the integrated base on it fit perfectly with the base and integrated very well with the trim on the interior. So there was really I didn't have to rip down anything or do a lot of extensive reworking on the interior. It came out almost flush and perfect to the exterior. So it's just been a lovely window to work with. So And then I think we have one more picture on. So this is on the exterior. This is a little bit of a challenge. You can order these windows either with a casing, exterior casing, or without. We opted for one without because we didn't know really where we wanted to end up. It's you know, a lot of these homes, the modern houses have, you know, as it was said in the introduction, it was all about clean, smooth lines and trying to integrate as neatly as possible and minimize the amount of you know, artifice and ornamentation. So this one, you know, we realize we have to add something which breaks that plane from the original time. And how we're going to remedy that is actually we're adding out another, after spray foaming the interior, we're now going to add an extra 2 inches of foam, rigid foam on the exterior as well. And then we'll extend all these. We'll make our own so-called extension jambs, help close them in a little bit tighter, and then put a much more original type of flat trim on the window. So that's it, Andrew. That's the finished product from the inside, which we think looks as close as the original as we can, along with all the insulated glass around it, and seems to be working well. We'll update you when we get to the exterior project.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Stephen, so much. And it's, I think, really interesting for me, and I think for many members of our audience, to hear how you go about both considerations of the aesthetic qualities of the house and then how you go about installing things so that you actually achieve the energy efficiency that is the goal. And the practicality of putting a building together can be very challenging. And so it's really interesting to see how you've sort of been engineering that aspect of your retrofit. And I think I'll before we open things up to questions, just thank our panelists very much. And again, you know, we've been focusing on houses that are you know, built in the 20th century and sort of in a modern idiom. But you know, our built form in New England often has these very simple shapes and forms that the modernists who built houses in New England really drew from. And I think a lot of the lessons of the simplicity of a house and preserving the simplicity of the aesthetic of a house is is a difficult thing to achieve and something to think carefully about when making interventions into a house, and warrants careful study so that the qualities and the simplicity that we often appreciate from the forms that grace our landscape are preserved and that continue to be a source of pleasure for us as we also help the world to avoid climate change. With that, I will turn it over to the audience to ask questions, and I hope you will, and either raise your hand with the, I can't see everybody, so if you use your virtual hand, it'll bring you to the top of the screen and I can see you, or feel free to type a question into the chat, which I can also relay to panelists. We have
I have a question. Can you hear me?
I can. Yep. Please
You
go ahead.
can hear. Okay. I'm Pamela Skuse Cox. I live in Sudbury, and unlike most of you probably, I live in an old colonial, which, you know, I'm feeling like there's no hope for an old colonial in terms of retrofitting it to be responsible into the 21st century, because this is a big house, 2 stories, full attic, not used, but open attic. And it's all gas. It's gas with radiators. Is there would any architect or heat expert say that it's impossible to convert your heating system to electric when you've got radiators in every single room? Does anyone know the answer to that question?
Everything is possible with time and money.
I was talking with, not coming off of mute. I'm Michael Moody. I'm also a member of CFRE. And I have been tracking a product from Germany, whose name escapes me now. I believe they make a lot of the heat pump water heaters for the US. I had wanted to get off of propane and onto a heat pump system to heat my water, domestic water, but I can't use the ones that go inside the house. So anyway, long story short, I was waiting for this product, which is a split system like the mini splits, has the condenser outside, and then inside it has a tank for your domestic hot water. Only in this case, it has a very large internal tank, and it can be used for heating the house. What I was waiting for was the ability to get something hotter than 120 degrees and something that would work down when the temperatures outside got lower. So this gets up to, I think it can produce 140-degree water, which becomes then more usable with radiators. I don't know whether it will work with your existing radiators. Basically, you have to get a match between what the radiators were designed for, the temperature of water that they were designed for. If they really don't work in your house until you get 180-degree water, then you may be in a pickle. But if they can get by with 140, or if you can replace some in some areas, get by with 140-degree water, then you may have a system that's possible. And I'll try to put it in the chat, the name of it. It's just escaping me right now. But I followed them all through COVID. Every year they were going to have it and have it and have it. They finally do have it on the market in the US. It's a German product.
So what you're saying is that the radiators would still continue to put out heat, but it would be sourced by hot water.
Well, your radiators currently, are running hot water, maybe steam. I don't know. If it's
That's right.
steam,
It's steam.
well, then I mean, I'm not an expert in this, but that sounds like a harder reach for an electric system with heat pump technology. So I'm at the limit of my knowledge there. Steam is going to be tough to do. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And there are some answers coming in to the chat as well. So Pamela, if you look there,
Now,
I think.
Do I just go to the chat?
Yep, and you should be able to click on that and see some of the responses.
Okay.
So
Thank
Michael, you're welcome. Michael, did you have a question, or did you want to, was your hand up?
I think it was Sebastian who mentioned something about getting a window installer to commit to a rough opening. I wasn't quite sure what he meant by that. I think I got it, but if you could explain that, Sebastian.
We'd received estimates and sort of picked out the hardware from EAS as well, for a bunch of windows. And I've had 5 contractors here who on the phone were willing to do it. And then following up, nobody wanted to come back. And what I gleaned from one of them was they didn't want to commit to the measurements for the windows because of the investment involved.
Meaning that they didn't feel like could measure it accurately enough so that they could then order a window and have it fit.
Correct.
Okay.
So if anyone, again, I think we have 5 different contractors here. But if anybody knows someone who would specialize in that, would be willing to do it, please let me know. Again, they're very large windows. Some are 6 by 10 feet, 6 by 12.
Sebastian, did you talk to A&A?
No.
Great company down the Cape.
Okay.
They'll solve any problem. They're really, really competent people. Great resources.
Okay, thanks, Mark.
And I think Colette wrote back to Pamela whether she has air conditioning, and I think that is possibly another solution in lieu of radiators. I don't know if one of our panelists wanted to speak about the ability to have a heat pump that's run through existing ductwork for an air conditioner, whether that's possible, or if there are drawbacks because the source of the heat diminishes over the length of the ductwork.
Is there existing ductwork? Excuse me. Is there existing?
There is on the second floor. It's central air on the second floor. But it's just a central air system. It's not heat as right now.
Right.
Well, Andrew, we did just that at the Schwann House. In both structures, there was ductwork and existing air handlers. So when we took out the oil, we put in new air handlers that operate heating and cooling off the heat pump, and then have electric heating as a backup. And it's worked quite well. Also insulated the ducts in that were exposed.
So the run of the ductwork didn't cause too much diminishment in the.
No, I mean, it's the same as it would be for any other fuel source. You're just using electricity, you know, which is, it's also important to remember in Massachusetts that a lot of our energy is clean and will someday soon be completely renewable. So just switching away from fossil fuels to electricity, even without reducing your electricity use, is, you don't have to get to net zero on your house to achieve carbon neutral house.
All right. Other questions? Ed, I saw you had your hand up.
Yes, I did. I unfortunately, I have a gas boiler and baseboard heating in my house, and I'd love to switch to heat pumps, but finding one that can substitute for a boiler, and especially a boiler that has, say, 140,000 BTU. I haven't seen anything that would allow me to do that. So I am asking whether I think that in one country, a company that you mentioned, or someone, SpacePack, I guess, is one thing I can look at. But what is the name of? Is there a company that has heat pumps that can pump up or pump out 100,000 BTU or 140? Because I have a not that well insulated house. But if you think about it, it's a problem for anybody in Lincoln with not very good insulation or ceiling. What can they do? And I hate to just get a replacement boiler, and I know Belinda will be really upset with me if I do that. So I'm interested in any response. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed.
And I remember the name of that German company, Stiebel Eltron, STIEBEL Eltron, ELTRON. I have the package of information from them. I'll send it to you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so, and I don't remember, what the overall capacity is, but we'll see.
Thank you.
We had a question about window replacement in a 1950s Carl Koch house, which Stephen also has been working on. The costs quoted for the windows are exorbitant, and can this panel speak to the cost of their windows and the best prices and the names of companies or people who did the work and how recently?
Well, I've got some experience with that. As a builder, I run into the problem of budgets really often, and I'd love to say that I only install Marvin or Schuco products all day long, but in my own deck house here behind me, I've got I've got Harvey vinyl windows painted dark brown, very crisp lines, 0.27, I think they were, but they're 6 years old now. And daylight opening almost the same as the existing, the glass opening. It's so aesthetically they work if you paint them dark brown. if they're white, you can't use vinyl really. It looks bad. But it is possible to every window doesn't have to be a really high-end product. I got a lot of windows for an affordable cost. So
Great.
Thank you. We have 64 windows and many of them are trapezoids. So you can't put a standard window in. So
you can
the
order.
problem is to keep them uniform.
You can order custom sizes, it's challenging. When you say 64 windows, I mean, that really that could be a really expensive project, and so I sympathize with your need to find something more affordable.
Stephen, go ahead.
Oh, I wanted to maybe not get too much information about the pricing. Before COVID, I used to be able to tell you it was $24 a square foot for this type of glass and $28 a square foot for this type of glass. But halfway through COVID, due to the gas prices, the prices of windows just shot up dramatically. And I think I had originally taken a quote from my house and it went up 30 to I think 40%, which was staggering. And I understand it's gone down a little bit now, the price of glass. So if you had these quotes a while ago, they were at their all-time highest peak. The price of glass and the cost of natural gas have a direct relationship. So gas has come down a little bit now anyway from its peak. So it may be worth talking to somebody else, and also, quite frankly, getting 3 bids. As indicated, most of the, I would definitely speak to the folks at EAS and Acton. I thought their pricing was very reasonable for their product. Surprisingly so, I think, when you're talking about triple pane. But also, there's a number of installers around here. Somebody mentioned a good company down the Cape. Was Mike maybe, but take 3 prices, and that's the best way to do it. It's tough recommending them because you never know who's working for them one year versus the next year. So that's another challenge. So I hesitate to give you one company's recommendation because they've also been having issues with maintaining their staff in the last couple of years as well. So, but happy to speak to you offline with more direct information about that.
Windows are a huge investment, and they're one of the biggest line items in any budget for constructing or renovating a house. And I would suggest doing what the Sizers did, which is to really get some serious data and energy auditing. And I'm not talking about what Mass Energy will do when they come out and kind of poke around your house, but hiring an engineer who can do thermal imaging and blower door testing to figure out where you could reduce the air leakage and improve the performance of your house, perhaps without replacing your windows. So maybe you've already done that, but I would suggest doing that before looking at a full window replacement.
Andrew, if I could add again, I think that's excellent advice, Matt. I think the Sizers have done it in a certain order. And going back to the order, somebody mentioned about converting over to a heat pump, but their house isn't really well insulated. And you know, I work with a pretty good HVAC company, and they actually dissuade people to make a move to a heat pump if the envelope is not well insulated and tight in the house, then you will not see the savings that you anticipate with the heat pump, and it'll really overwork. I think, and Matt, I'd love to hear, or Andrew, your input on this, but I believe in firming up the envelope as best as you can within reason first, and then making the shift over. But what are your thoughts?
Well, I'll let Matt speak to that because he has a lot of practical experience.
Well, I see Scott has a question. I'll just say that on the two houses I've shown you, I'm doing a little ass backwards because I did a lot of the improvements and changes and am now getting thermal imaging and blower door testing done. So I don't exactly know what to say for myself, but don't do what I say, not what I do.
And I'll Scott, just before I turn to you, I think, you know, a thought that I've heard many people express is you can install a heat pump system. You can always keep your current system going, you know, while it's functional as well, and then you know, sort of have a blend of different systems that are operating in a house. Also, if you are working to install solar, you know, you're going to cut down on your electric bill. So there's some ways of sort of phasing in an approach so that you don't have, you know, Steven says, a very high sticker shock with your electric bill. They all require capital investment. But there are probably ways, you know, working with a good consultant, whether it's an architect or a builder or energy consultant, to figure out what the right phasing is. And that's really, you know, depending on the circumstances of your house and your budget, a way of starting to work and tackle the problem. So Scott, well, welcome, and look forward to your thoughts or comments.
A couple things. Thank you very much. It's a great presentation. I had to step away for a couple minutes, so I may be duplicating something. But one of the most important things to me is the prep of the windows before the windows go in. And it's just, you know, I've been doing that lately with a new house, and it's astonishing what I've learned about, you know, Huber's zip stretch tape and Sega tapes and things like that to make sure you're not going to have water infiltration, and then some of those for air infiltration as well. That's one. Second, I totally agree with that phasing, because I've heard more stories of people with heat pumps putting them in without doing the other steps first, and having just massive problems of shock of what their bills look like. So I think the heat pumps, for the great success of them, needs to have that phasing, or else unless you're doing it intentionally to, you know, to have it phased slightly differently, but knowing that the impact. And the other question is, does anyone know, if you keep your heating system, your old one, as a backup, do you still get the large mass save rebates if you have not removed it and gone to primary for the heat pumps?
It's less of a rebate.
Okay.
You get
So if you
10,000
don't
if you take it
remove,
out.
if you don't
Yeah.
remove, you don't get it.
Right, you get 3,500, I think, if you don't remove.
Okay.
10,000 if you do.
Very important consideration. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you for doing this tonight. This is great.
Oh yeah, well, it's a great team effort here. So I wanted to go back to a point that Judith had raised, and maybe the builders and the architects can speak to this about if you're replacing a window and it doesn't meet current code, but you're not doing enough of a renovation that would trigger the need to upgrade to the current building code. Is that a problem with the when you're simply replacing a window?
I think when I heard Judith speak, she said, did she use the term egressible window?
Yeah.
Or Judah, was it egressable or just a standard window?
You can, I think you can unmute yourself now, Judith. We can't hear you.
Her question was about an egress window. It was about making it meet the minimum dimensions for egress requirements.
So typically when
Go ahead, Stephen.
if you're renovating a house, and I don't build new, I typically renovate. The old days, the fire department would have a template. It was there are two handles on, and they'd come in, they'd make sure that an egressable window could fit this template coming right through the window. And it was 20 by 18, if I recall. And you wouldn't get your occupancy permit unless you had one of these, a sufficient number, especially working in a place like Brookline. And so that may be the issue. And I think that an egressable window is going to be an egressable window for them. I don't think they're going to look at 19 inches. I don't think it's grandfathered in. I think it's a safety. It's in the fire code, and therefore it's not really building code.
Okay.
There's another angle to it too, though, I think, especially in Lincoln, where what your problem may be a question of semantics, and just this could be a repair, and if it's a repair, then you don't even need a permit. So what I would recommend is that you talk to Mark Robidoux and to explain your problem and use him as a resource, because I mean he wants to help. The building inspectors in general, no matter what town you're in, I think want to help you solve problems, and they don't want to create roadblocks and cause people to spend a whole lot of money. If this is an existing window in a architecturally sensitive house, they're going to work hard to help you find a solution. And if you're cutting a new window, or if you're making a new bedroom or something, then of course it's got to.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah. So I encourage you to call the building inspector and just ask him how he would how he'd approach that.
It's the width of the casement is not the only problem with it. Of course, it's single glazed. They're classic Hopes steel windows, and they're a very important part of the aesthetics of the house. So it's not only allowing people to get out of the house in case of fire. It's really a question of, would you want to reglaze it with even double paned? It doesn't have the casement frame does not have a thermal break in it, and all of those are much bigger width. So if we did replace it with Hope's casements with a thermal break, it would be a lot fatter silhouette.
Maybe
what we need is quilted curtains.
Well, Judith, I've lived with those same windows. And no, replacing the glass with insulated glass is pointless because of the thermal bridging of the steel frame and the air leakage around the sash. Again, I'd recommend a blower door test to figure it out, but they can be a lot tighter than they are now if they've got years and years of paint on them. Just properly cleaning them, scraping them, and painting them gets you a tighter seal. You have storm panels that you could put over them in the winter.
We do.
Yeah, because that helps. And they're very expensive to replace. I'd love to hear Catherine chime in, because I know that she has done an amazing job with her Hope's windows. But to me, if they're an important element of your home architecturally, I would think long and hard before replacing them.
I can jump in. Thanks, Matt. We did put in a huge New Hope's window, and it does have a thermal break in it. So Michael knows more about it than me. So have you checked with Hope's?
No.
You should call him just to check.
Is it an operable window?
No, it's a fixed window.
Yeah, no, our fixed windows are set directly into the frame. That's another problem.
Well, anyway, just check with them and see what they say.
Well, they may be coming around, it seems to me. A long time ago, we checked with them, but they were not interested. But, you know, times have changed, and I think they know that we're all supposed to be getting more energy efficient.
Well, they also make a lot of new windows for really important buildings all over the world. So I think they know about thermal breaks and
Yeah.
you know, check with them.
Yeah, they have restoration grade products that they use for colleges and you know, large apartment buildings that are getting historic tax credits. So you can get a thermally broken insulated unit from them. It's just that they are extremely expensive. So the money might be better spent elsewhere.
Deck House has replacement units. Also, they make them, I think, custom size. I would think that a number of people here probably have them. And they have, I think they have egress hardware also that opens the window a little bit more. So even if you don't get your 20 inches, if you show them that you bought the, you know, the egress hardware you're trying to get to the 20, that may fly.
You have to measure every person in the house and try to let them out a window.
There you go. A question I had for our panelists and others on the Zoom as well is when you're adding insulation to a roof, and particularly in a modern house, it really adds a dimensionality to the roof that, you know, wasn't part of the original design intent. I think a lot of deck house owners on the call have this issue where you go from a very thin fascia board to a very what could be a very thick fascia board. And I'm interested in hearing about solutions that people have experimented with to try to if it bothers them, or if they have design solutions that mitigate against a very wide fascia board.
Well, we did it on the deck house, and our design solution is not to look at it.
Yeah.
You know, it's such you get such a huge return for all that insulation up there. It's one of the best things you can do. And I think that if you can maybe not go whole hog, you know, we put 6 inches of insulation on that deck house and extended the rake board up. You know, and it looks okay. Mm-hmm. And a deck house, again, it's different from a house like a one-off house like Judith's house or the Schwann house here, where you know, it is the example of this architecture. So I think that in some ways the deck house I would take a little bit of liberty in favor of energy efficiency. But
yeah,
you draw that line at what some people do, like trying to insulate under the overhangs and lowering their window heads. You know, you can really start to go a little too far and mess with the architecture for a little return. But boy, that big thick blanket on the roof that's a big return for your money and comfort.
Matt, has anybody tried tapered from the front fascia? So you're getting an odd side view, but have they tried tapered on the overhangs?
Every roofer I've talked to about that just looks at me blankly, because yes, that's probably doable. I've also seen on more contemporary posted beam houses by, you know, but at a level of cost that so exceeds what we are capable of, where they kind of stop, the roof steps down at the edge. So the thick insulation steps down. So you get that nice thin edge, the perimeter, but you get the thick insulation where you want it. But that's doubles the amount of flashing. You then have two junctures where you're flashing, you know, and it increases your vulnerability to water infiltration and increases your cost, you know, but it does achieve what you're thinking of achieving.
You also have to think about where the vapor barrier is.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's really important. Andrew, my solution again is just paint it dark brown, you know, state park brown, and it recedes and it's quieter. But the sister to my deck house, sister house 2 doors down, was sold, I don't know, 10 years ago. Before the sale, they put 1.5 inches of XPS up on the roof and re-roofed it. And ironically, a builder moved into the house, bought the house, and it was raining condensation on a sunny day inside through the house. And I think they showed it to building sciences, and they found out that there was a moment, you know, the vapor barrier was misplaced, and the sorry, dew point, yeah. And so it was condensing. And the solution was to put another 4 inches of insulation up there. So, you know, the temptation to, you know, keep that fascia and rake board narrow shouldn't be too strong. I think you have to put, the lesson here was that you really need to put, he put 6 inches up there, and that solved his problem.
Yeah.
But beware of going too thin.
Yep.
And call building sciences if in doubt, or not call them. They read them. It's a really excellent resource online for all questions about envelope technology and you know, energy efficiency, heat pumps, everything.
Excellent.
What was his name?
The building technologies.
Yeah.
It's building sciences. Sorry. And
building science engineering.
Yeah, building sciences. They're in Westford.
Google building science engineering, and they have a website and what used to be a newsletter, and I think it's what you're talking about, Mark. It's an excellent resource.
That's right.
They are the gurus, and they have a magnificent newsletter you can sign up for as well.
Right.
Oh.
Joe Stebrook. He is the sort of the guru of that industry.
So it's under building sciences, or you mentioned Google or something?
Well, the company is called Building Science Engineering.
Okay, got you. Thank you.
I'm just saying, if you Google that term, you will find their website and their videos and articles.
Right. Okay.
All right. Other questions for our panelists or thoughts from the panel?
I could add something that to what Stephen said earlier about the cost of glass. Some good news is that I found, as a builder, I found that lumber prices have dropped significantly. You know, a year ago I was paying $120 for a sheet of, you know, Advantech 3/4 inch underlayment. It's $42 now. So if you were hesitant, if you got pricing for a project last year, it might be and it involved a lot of lumber. I can't say glass went down, but lumber was really remarkable. Then you know, you might want to revisit your project if you put it on the shelf.
Great.
That is good news.
Yeah. All right. Well, don't see any other hands going up, and I'm cognizant that we've been going for well over an hour and a half. So I would like to again thank CFRE for the opportunity to present tonight, collaborate, and for all our panelists for their comments and insights on how they've been working on their own homes to get them to net zero. And I hope that you'll tune in for the other CFRE series on getting your house to net zero, and also review the earlier recordings, which I think are very worthwhile and very informative about how to tackle a lot of the elements and think about the phasing of how to retrofit a home. And so with that, I wish everybody a very good evening and look forward to continuing the conversation offline and see everybody around town. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Andrew.
Andrew.